As Guyana sits on the economic and political crossroads, we speak to the nation's opinion leaders and decision makers to get their views on the challenges the country faces and the path it must take to achieve national development. Welcome to Nation Watch. Now here is your host Mervyn Williams, former member of the Guyana Parliament.
Welcome to Nation Watch for Sunday, February 4th, 2024. Nation Watch is a production of the People's National Congress Reform. I'm your host, Mervyn Williams. Today we'll be discussing Budget 2024, unequal treatment. But before we get to the introduction of my guest and the conversation, there is a particular matter I'd like to discuss. I'll ask my technical operator to put up an image there for you to look at. This is from the estimates of Budget 2024. It is from the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs. And this, I'm sure, has no precedent. This is the sum of $9 billion, I believe it is. $9 billion. And the project title is Amerindian Development Fund. The entire $9 billion is described in four lines. Payment of retention, youth entrepreneurship and apprenticeship program, presidential grants, and Amerindian development projects and programs. This is the height of disrespect for the owners of this money, the tax-paying public of this country. Pauline Sukai and the People's Progressive Party, and I notice that Dr. Hutchinson has joined the band of persons now. I like to peddle this story that, the opposition doesn't like indigenous peoples and therefore they will criticize things of this nature. But this is about breaches and accountability and transparency principles. This is a case where a large sum of money is allocated for unspecified purposes. And the minister answering questions on this matter told the National Assembly and this nation that the projects have not yet been identified. They have not yet been approved. They now have to go and consult. How can you budget $9 billion for undetermined projects? The Amerindian Development Fund program that I know of, that I worked with, was managed by a board, the ADF board, which was co-chaired by the UNDP resident rep and the Minister of Indigenous Peoples Affairs. All proposals have been prepared and sent to that board for consideration and if thought fit approval. They form part of a work plan, an annual work plan. It is that annual work plan which form the basis for budgeting. This is unforgivable, Pauline Sukai. This is a clear indication that the indigenous peoples of this country are now being used by the People's Progressive Party through agent Pauline Sukai as a facility for setting up a slush fund for voter procurement. I will stop there and I'll ask our viewers to ponder on what I just said. But now I'd like to, and with humble apologies to my guests, introduce Mr. Rawle, who is my guest for today. We all know Mr. Lucas, educator, accountant, economist, commentator, and a prolific writer on matters of the nature that we're going to be discussing today. Mr. Lucas, welcome once again to Nation Watch.
Thank you very much, Marvin. It's my pleasure to be here.
Mr. Lucas, as always, we go straight to business. Following Budget 2024, there have been all sorts of accusations and finger pointing. The government clearly was not prepared to defend its budget. Instead, they launched an outright attack on the record of the AP and UAFC as they saw it, and they launched another attack on the presentations made by the AP and UAFC parliamentarians on Budget 2024 and spent precious little time defending their own proposal. More recently, I call this the Jagali administration. More recently, Mr. Ali, I suppose 50% of the administration, went public on a number of issues, suggesting that the APNU never liked the Guyana Sugar Corporation, don't like the people who work there, don't like the things that Gaisuco has been doing in the past, and so on. Now, I don't know if the numbers that are available to us are available to the government officials, because the numbers available to me say that between 2015 and 2018, the APNU AFC administration made available to Gaisuco the sum of 61.5 billion Guyana dollars. I repeat that, 61.5 billion Guyana dollars. The People's Progressive Party from 2020 to 23 made available to Gaisuco a further $22 billion. Now, Gaisuco has benefited from 2015 to 2023 from the availability of 83.5 billion Guyana dollars. Let's look at these numbers, Mr. Lucas, from the perspective of the operations of Gaisuco, what Gaisuco contributes to the national economy, and Gaisuco's profitability as a whole. Would you share with us your perspective on the viability of the Guyana Sugar Corporation pre-2015 and over the period 15 to 20?
Well, thank you, Marvin. Indeed, the government has indeed been quite recently, speaking a lot about its management of the economy and comparing it to the management of the economy under the Granger administration, or the coalition, as you may want to call it. And the first thing that struck me in the things that the government has been saying is the extent to which it has gone to denigrate the work of the coalition. And the second thing that struck me was the attempt that it is making to take credit for the financial bounty that this country is enjoying from the oil and gas industry. But so the thoughts that I want to offer today are really intended to provide Guyanese with an objective and an unbiased version of reality. Because what has been coming out of the mouth of the government is not necessarily consistent with the reality as expressed in the official documents of the various institutions that they have spoken about. In particular, what the government has been doing is offering the people of Guyana a narrative which relates to the comparison of the treatment of sugar and the treatment of bauxite, to convey the impression that the management of those two industries under the coalition was dismal, and to suggest that the management of the industry under the PPP government has been, illustrious, excellent, and so forth. But I believe, as you said, the information which is available may offer Guyanese an opportunity to form their own opinion with respect to the comments and observations that I would make here. Now, when it comes to sugar, for example, we have some statistics which we will share with you. But before we share the statistics, I want to present you with a scenario. I want to present our listeners and viewers with a scenario. And the scenario is this. Assume that your daughter earned $5,000 per week, and she took all of that money and bought some hair products. And then she came back to her community with those hair products and sold them for $2,000. I'm sure when you learn of that, you would be appalled, because you know that what she's doing is not good business, and you would certainly question her own financial judgment on a matter like that. And I believe there's nobody in this country who I think would think of that as a good business practice.
I know of two, but sorry.
Well, there might be some, but well, the only people I know who would do something like that would be the people we call dunstouts, who would go out there, maybe pick up something worth $5,000 and come and sell it for $500 to satisfy whatever interest they may have at the moment. But coming back to this more serious matter of the financial management between the two administrations, between the Granger administration and between the PPP administration, I don't even think anybody in the private sector would tolerate that sort of behavior. In addition to that, your daughter then turns around and asks the parents for money to take care of her needs after doing what she did. And when the parents got a little fed up of, helping her and stopped giving her any money, what she ends up doing then is going to the family friend and asking. And the family friend, knowing the family quite well, probably might help once or twice. But at some point, the family friend will come over to the family and say, look, this is what your daughter has been doing. I would just want to make you aware. Just ponder that for a moment. Now let us go to Gaisuko. If we can.
Yeah, we have some, right. The graphic is up there.
Right. So we have in the top table, we have an entry from the profit and loss statement of the Guyana Sugar Corporation, Gaisuko. The first table, or the table at the top, shows the performance of the industry from 2010 to 2014.
Can we pull that up, please, closer?
Right. No, that's okay. The 2010 to 2014. And as you can see, from 2010 to 2014, just looking at the revenue and cost of goods sold lines of Gaisuko, you can see that Gaisuko is making a gross loss progressively from 2011 to 2014. So what did we find? What did we see? I think there should be another line there going to 2014 that shows an $18 billion deficit. It moved from 1.3 billion in 2011 to $8 billion in 2014. That was the situation in 2014. Now, the way Gaisuko is behaving there is similar to the way the young lady that we just described in the scenario was behaving. Taking money that she got, spending it on items, and then turning around and selling the item below the cost and leaving that deficit. I don't know who in the private sector would do that. and do that continuously for years. But that is the situation you are seeing with Gaisuko. Then you had Gaisuko. So the coalition government came in, but before the coalition government came in, I want to point out that the government of Guyana had given Gaisuko by 2014 about $30 billion, $39 or $40 billion of taxpayers' money. During that period as well, what you had was the European Union, which had a market relationship with Gaisuko, gave Gaisuko another $30 billion in order to help it to make the adjustments to its situation, its operational situation, because the European Union knew that if it left Gaisuko all by itself, the industry would collapse. And so the government was expected to use the money gotten from the European Union to fix the industry, make the appropriate adjustments to help it so that it can, to sustain itself. Let us put it that way. During that period as well, so that brings you now to $70 billion. During that period as well, Guyana borrowed $200 million to build a sugar factory at Skeldon, which never worked. So you can imagine that with all of that money, $110 billion, Gaisuko handed to the coalition by 2015 a deficit of $18 billion in its operations. And that does not even include the items below the line, which would be admin costs, utilities, and all those things. I'm just dealing with the decision point, the critical point for decision making. Mm-hmm. And what you're seeing there in 2014 is 18 billion loss. That's what the coalition would have come to in 2015. That's what they would have seen in 2015. So what did the coalition do? Now, the coalition had two choices, because I should tell you, in the world of business, you have three critical decision points. The first decision point that most people talk about, and like, especially if you're an economist, is this profit maximization thing, where your marginal revenue or your price must at least be equal to your marginal cost. That's the profit maximizing situation, and most people like that. Most people see that as a favorable thing. Then you have the break-even situation, and the break-even situation occurs where your price is at least equal to your average cost. So, you're not losing, you're not gaining, but you're not losing. And then you come to the point of shutting down your business. And that occurs when marginal revenue is lower than your variable cost. And that's the situation with Gaisuko that the coalition found in 2014. The numbers that you're seeing there, where you have the negative gross profit, represents a situation where variable cost is actually greater than the price that you're selling your product for. That is the decision point at which you shut down an industry. That was the choice that faced the coalition in 2015. If the coalition was very insensitive to Gaisuko, it could have shut down that industry and sent 16,000 people home. But instead of doing that, as the leader of the AFC always says, Kamraj Ramditan, what the coalition did was right-size Gaisuko. And so in the second table that up there, you would see that Gaisuko's losses started to come down as the government, as the Granger administration gave it some subsidies, 12,000 in 2015, 10,000 in 2016, and as the host of this program said, 9.15 in 2017. That it did that in an attempt to fix the industry. Now, every time Gaisuco got money in the form of a subsidy, Gaisuco was really behaving like the young girl who was going around the place asking family friends for financial assistance. And it was the taxpayers of Guyana that were giving Gaisuco the financial assistance, even though it was behaving recklessly according to those figures. So what did the coalition do? The coalition, in making the adjustments as it did, including closing a couple of estates, actually saw Gaisuco behaving responsibly. And so it stopped giving Gaisuco the subsidy, taking Gaisuco off of the backs of the taxpayers of Guyana, and actually assisted Gaisuco to raise its own money so that it could self-finance, it could finance itself, it could finance its operations. It shows a level of confidence in the ability of the industry, adjusted as done by the coalition, to help it to improve. And I am sorry you don't have the 2019 column there. But if you had the 2019 column there, you would see that Gaisuco's deficit gross loss came down to $642 million. From 18 billion, a drop of 97%.
Yeah, significant.
So it was moving in the right direction. Unlike what this government has been saying about Gaisuco and the attitude of the coalition government to that industry. I cannot understand why it is this government would walk around this country trying to peddle such falsities about the behavior of the coalition towards the administration of Gaisuco and the workers of that sugar industry. So I think it's critical. Now, if you go back to 2020 and 2021, I don't have the data for 2022 and 2023, but you will see Gaisuco has returned to the irresponsible behavior where the gross losses are beginning to rise once again, and the government is being forced now to use taxpayers' money from the friends of Gaisuco, the taxpayers of this country, to help Gaisuco, and they are calling that responsible financial management. Now, just before, there are three other things we need to point out about those negative numbers. Those negative numbers are also telling us that Guyana is actually subsidizing the sugar consumption of foreign consumers. That $18 billion loss in 2014, for example, or any of the losses, means that the foreign consumer is not paying the full price for the product. And the people of Guyana are the ones who are absorbing that loss. So we are actually financing, when we are struggling here in this country, we're actually financing the consumption of others, something that we can ill afford, but yet this government insists that that is the way it must go, by doing the things it is doing to harm the people of this country.
Yeah, Mr. Lucas, there is a critical point that I'd like to ask you for a brief comment on before I move this conversation forward. In 2018, there was a bond of $30 billion that you referred to in your presentation. There was, when the coalition demitted office, a balance of $18 billion of that bond that the managers of Guyana Sugar Corporation have not yet accounted for to the people of this country. I have not, for example, heard the Minister of Finance in his budget presentation allude in any way whatsoever to the manner in which this $18 billion have been utilized, and to what benefit?
Well, that's a good observation, because for me, like you, I have no indication as to what they have done with that 18 billion. And no journalist in this country is asking them what they have done with the $18 billion. But what I'm pointing out is that Gaisuco was in a position to do the things that, for example, the European Union expected it to do, which was to continue right-sizing the industry and making sugar a profitable, no matter how small, industry in this country. But what is more shocking to me, Marvin, is the fact that the private sector cheers on that behavior of the government, encouraging Gaisuco to incur losses and to cause the taxpayers of this country to have to finance the consumption of sugar for foreigners. That is what I cannot understand. The private sector of this country is cheering that on, and they call that good financial management, but none of them would allow that to happen to their business.
And to complement that position, we have the holder of the highest office in the land boldly proclaiming a pack of lies. I'll quote some of it here. I mean, I like your diplomatic language, but I must call it for what it is. Here's what Mr. Ali said in a recent video publication. He said that the coalition, quote, stopped all investment in drainage and irrigation. And he was speaking of Gaisuco. He went on to say that the coalition, quote, closed down the sugar industry. Line number 2. He goes on to accuse the coalition of, in his words, like bandits in the night, closed down sugar estates. Like bandits in the night, describing a government that successfully right-sized the Ghana Sugar Corporation. And then here is the other lie. He said when they came to government, there was no cane in the field, no cane in the field, but they produced sugar. And he said there were no punts. When they came to government, there were no punts. And I can tell you categorically that 66 punt loads of cane, sugar cane, were left in the trench at Eiflet Estate and left to rot and had to be disposed of, had to be dumped. 66 punt loads of cane in a year when the Ghana Sugar Corporation's Eiflet Estate managed only 6,000 tons in an entire year from mismanagement and the absence of maintenance and proper coordinated project management. Now, it is clear to those who want to face the truth that the Granger administration absorbed the works that were being done by the Ghana Sugar Corporation. I mean, the PPP likes to brag that the sugar, Gaisuco is involved in DNI, Gaisuco is involved in health clinics. All of the health clinics that were managed by Gaisuco, perhaps with the exception of the one at the Eiflet Estate, were taken over by the Ministry of Public Health, staffed and managed, and those that were shut down were reopened under the Granger administration. The drainage and irrigation works that the Ghana Sugar Corporation did under the People's Progressive Party that they brag about were all absorbed into the National Drainage and Irrigation Authority, the official state entity responsible for this particular set of functions. So Jagdeo likes to say that Gaisuco is involved in these areas and therefore performs a community service and is indispensable in that regard. Where are we now that all of these entities, the healthcare facilities and the drainage and irrigation functions have been absorbed into the government of the Granger era? Where are we now in terms of the management of these assets and these facilities?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't work for the government. I don't work for Gaisuko, so I don't know what they are doing. And if they've continued the practice of the national government maintaining the maintenance for the drainage and irrigation system in the country. But what I want to tell you is this. You don't have to take my word for it. But I would recommend anybody to go to table 11.1 in the annual report of the Bank of Guyana, and you will see, go to the 2022 report, and what you will see is the performance of sugar output under the coalition and the performance of sugar output since the PPP has returned to office. And at least if there was no sugar cane being produced, if there was no cane being produced, if there was no sugar being produced, then the report that I'm talking about would show zero. I would like you to go into that report and you will see for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Go and see. And so some of the observations that the host made could be verified there. And therefore the view that he's challenging, the view that has come from the president that he's challenging, can either be verified or debunked by looking at that report. I must admit, I don't know why the president would say something, but I did hear it. I don't know why he would say some of the things that he said, and I'm beginning to wonder if the leaders of the PPP and the leaders of this government really understand the words of our Pledge of Allegiance in this country.
Oh, just a passing comment. The sitting president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana is the beneficiary of lands from a closed sugar estate. His home once served as the senior staff guest house for the Leonora Sugar Estate. And maybe one day he will tell us the entire story. Now, there have been corresponding accusations about the coalition administration not being kind to bauxite workers, whereas the PPP were overly generous, something that cannot be substantiated by numbers or fact. We know that there were deficits in labor regulation compliance in the particular sector under the People's Progressive Party government, where leaders of the union movement, the labor movement, for example, believe that the Ministry of Labor actually took sides instead of being impartial. And perhaps the same could be said today of the teachers' union situation. Any comment from you, Mr. Lucas, on the question of management of bauxite in perhaps a similar but shorter way that you treated sugar, for example?
Well, I mean, really and truly, there's no comparison between sugar and bauxite. Sugar is a government-owned, people of Guyana-owned industry. Bauxite is privately owned industry. And so what that means is that, the government of Guyana has no control over sugar beyond the regulatory responsibility that it has. And what I know occurred under the PPP administration, prior to 2015, was that none of the bauxite companies paid anything to the government of Guyana. The government of Guyana, the people of this country, got no revenue from any of the bauxite companies until 2019. The year was 2019. The coalition was in power. So how it is that these companies could have been operating for so many years and they could not generate any revenue or enough revenue to pay something for the benefit of the people of Guyana, in particular those working in the industry, and where it operates. Secondly, and this point I want to make, during that period, the private company, one of the private companies, abused the workers of the company. And the government of Guyana, because this happened, I think, in 2009, 2010, and the government of Guyana of that time did absolutely nothing to protect the interests of that worker or its colleagues. So if you saw bad labor relations between the workers and management of that private company or those private companies, it has to do with the failure of the government of Guyana of the day to help ensure that there was fairness in the industry and that workers got fair treatment just as much as they wanted to ensure that the investor got fair treatment. It was clearly biased and one-sided. But yet today, these people are going to come and tell people who were adversely affected by the circumstances in that industry that is the other guy who has made your life miserable and not us. Again, I come back to the Pledge of Allegiance. The incident that I heard of that occurred in the bauxite industry where workers were abused by the management, physically abused by the management of that company, caused me to wonder about the words to be loyal to my country. It caused me to wonder to be loyal to my country, to be obedient to the laws of Guyana, and to love my fellow citizens and dedicate my energies towards the happiness and prosperity. Who stood up? Which government stood up for those workers? None. They did not stand up. The PPP government failed to stand up, in the words of our pledge, to dedicate itself to the happiness and prosperity of the people of Guyana. Failed to do it.
Brings to mind the case of a young indigenous girl as well who was betrayed by the state apparatus, but there's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Mr. Lucas, Mr. Ali, Mr. Irfan Ali, said that infrastructure development, the ones that they're pursuing now, projects they're pursuing now, leads to wealth creation. The real wealth in this country is being generated from the oil industry. It is that oil wealth that fuels infrastructure development. It is that oil wealth which is being depleted by 41 or 42% of every cent, every dollar that goes into public infrastructure. It is that oil wealth that is being scraped out of the sovereign wealth fund at liberty, with no residue being there, being left there for future generations. Speak, please, sir, on the whole question of policy, coalition Granger administration versus People's Progressive Party, current administration, as it relates to the sovereign wealth fund and how our tax coffers are benefiting and how our people are benefiting, if at all.
Yeah, I think one of the things that this government has been doing is trying to tell people that it is their policies that has the Guyana economy humming right now, and the world describing it as the fastest growing and one of the richest economies in the world. But I want to point out to people the policies of the Granger administration with respect to the oil industry and compare it with the impact of the policies of the PPP on this economy. You know, when you look at the oil industry, what was the policy of the Granger administration? One, it gave the industry tax breaks. Two, it doubled the royalties payments that Exxon had to make compared to what the PPP was asking for. Three, the protection of the financial interests of the people of Guyana was reflected in the inclusion of mandatory audits of the oil industry. Four, it also included, based upon the work that was being done by the EPA, the protection of the people of this country with the inclusion of insurance and subsequently the parent company guarantee to protect the financial interests of the people of this country. Then, of course, it had a financial bonus related to the protection of our territory, the defense, I should say, of our territorial integrity. And finally, it had a component that addressed the issue of corporate social responsibility. As a consequence of that policy or those policies, the oil industry has now been able to generate 70% of the income that the people of this country earn. 70% of the income, the GDP income of this economy. If you can see the slide on the screen, you will see at the top 70% of the national income or GDP of this country generated by the oil industry. And all of that came from the policy of the Granger administration. The same policy is contained in the production sharing agreement, the one that everybody tries to condemn, including the PPP. But yet the only industry in this country that has been able to demonstrate that it can use the benefits, the tax benefits that it got from a government is the oil and gas industry. All these years, the PPP has been in power. For 20, how much odd years the PPP has been in power, giving tax breaks to forestry, to fishing, to gold, to business outsourcing, you name it, bauxite, all of them. None has had the impact that the oil and gas industry has had on this country. People talk about lopsided agreement because it doesn't ring fence and it doesn't deal with decommissioning and all of that. No, none of those other agreements deal with those things. None. But yet, people in this country are prepared to condemn a very good thing. Can't see that is the same policies that the PPP has been trying to give others in the construction industry and all of those other industries, you know, the Qualphone and all those companies getting tax breaks, and cannot produce the impact that the oil and gas industry, as a consequence of the policies of the Granger administration in that for this country. All the boasts about jobs being created, local content, this, that, and the other, is a direct consequence of the policies of the Granger administration with respect to the oil and gas industry. Consequently, oil and gas is now responsible for 90% of our foreign earnings, 90%, 70% of our GDP. You have 28 other industries, all of which have been benefiting from government PPP policies and cannot even match, can't even come halfway, make the, a 50% contribution to what oil and gas has done in this country. And the interesting thing is, before I come to talk about the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the interesting thing about this thing is, recently I heard a businessman complaining about the price of the stocks of his company, not doing well on the stock exchange. The reason for that is because the major parts of this economy are really not doing as well, because the oil industry shows you that it is the one that is driving this economy. And the stock market in Guyana lost nearly 13% of its value last year, which means, therefore, that it made no sense investing in that industry. It is quite clear that, and one of the things about stock markets is that they are leading indicators. Serious investors take signals from that market to tell them whether the economy will perform well or not. And it is obvious from our stock market and the performance of some of these industries, half of which can't even, match, can't even produce 1% of our GDP. What can't even produce 1% of our GDP? But oil has done it. The policies of the Granger administration have made that possible. And people are condemning it and going around the place accepting the folly that is coming out of the mouths of some of these leaders in this country. It's phenomenal. I just cannot understand what it is they are seeing, that makes them believe. And if you look at it carefully, the coalition government was able to give public servants nearly 3 times as much money, even though they're getting a larger amount today because of the pie. But in terms of its value, because of inflation and all of those factors, because of that problem, the coalition ended up giving maybe 2 or 3 times more money than this, with all of this money that we have from oil.
But it appears that the PPP administration is basing its, and this is a diversion really, basing its computation of public sector wages, but strictly on the non-oil sector.
Yeah,
based on the numbers.
Yeah, based on the numbers, that's what they are attempting to do.
So it is clear that the mission is to ensure that the working class in this country does not, in fact, benefit from oil. That's the logical conclusion.
That's a reasonable conclusion to draw. That's a reasonable, but you did ask me about the sovereign wealth fund. And indeed, we have to be careful. And the challenge that I have with this administration is the way in which they are managing, one, our relationship with Exxon, and 2, the money coming out of that fund. And in my view, we are overspending because, and I think that is partly responsible for some of the foreign exchange problems that we are experiencing in this country. Because what is happening is most of the industries that are now hanging on the coattail of the oil and gas industry that has actually benefited from the Granger policies are import-dependent countries, industries, which means that they don't generate foreign currency, but they use a lot of it. And this question of buying a lot of equipment, for the infrastructure works, bringing in a lot of machinery and so forth, along with the fact that we have a lot of consumers now who are also looking to bring in motor vehicles and other stuff for themselves. It's putting pressure on the demand for foreign exchange is virtually, increasing faster than the supply. The thing about the supply is the money that comes from oil goes to the government's account, which means that Bank of Guyana and others control that. What the commercial banks get is based upon the transactions that they do on behalf of their customers. So somebody who is exporting some stuff will be paid in foreign currency that will land in the commercial bank that is facilitating that transaction. And if the export activities are not as strong as they ought to be, which is basically outside it's in the non-oil economy. If it is not as strong as it ought to be, then you will not be generating foreign exchange that will be accessible to, all and sundry at the rate that is required. And that's part of the problem. Another part of that problem, too, has to do with the number of foreigners that we have investing or working in the country. They too have to send money home, and so that is an increase on the demand. So coming back to the sovereign wealth fund, when the government of Guyana then begins to take substantial amounts of money out of the sovereign wealth fund to put it in industries that are not generating foreign currency, it is harming the ones coming behind. And so the sovereign wealth fund will not necessarily be any stronger to support this economy should there be a downturn, God forbid, in oil prices or the global economy and so forth. So the management of that fund is troubling for me.
Guyana is on a spending spree, our first $1 trillion budget, cleaning out on multiple occasions the sovereign wealth fund to fund these capital projects, the kind that Mr. Ali claims leads to wealth creation. Borrowing on projected oil revenues, cleaning out the reserves. What are the likely impacts in the medium to long term on our economy, given the volatility of oil particularly?
Well, I mean, it all depends upon the amount of money we have in the fund at the time that occurs. And I mean, I don't know, I haven't looked specifically at the relationship between the outflows and the anticipated inflows and so forth. Should there be a shock that hits our economy? But what I want to point out really, the thing that is of greater interest to me is this government refuses to allow our municipalities to borrow money on future
rates and
taxes that people in this country, so that the municipality can do its work.
And that's guaranteed income.
And that's guaranteed income. And the thing is, they refuse to allow them to do it, but they are doing that with our sovereign wealth fund.
Jeopardizing the future of our children yet unborn.
Yes.
We are just about out of time. These conversations can, drift by, get by so quickly. Is there anything that you wanted to say, Mr. Lucas, in the conversation that you were not able to? You have maybe 2-3 minutes to pull that in.
No, well, I think the one thing that I want to emphasize, because I think I've said it, but the one thing that I want to emphasize is that Guyanese should stop condemning the production sharing agreement. It is the one agreement that contains policies that are generating the wealth available to this country. And in my view, the amount of wealth that we are generating, at least it gives me comfort that the proposals that are being made by some persons in our society, that we should have more structured cash grants being made available to the people of this country so that they can participate effectively and meaningfully in the oil wealth of this country, is something that ought to be pushed and secured. Because at the end of the day, and I've heard the leader of the opposition say this, I know that this is a vision he has and something that he is dear to him, the people-centered development strategy. And he strongly believes that we should be giving our people more than 79 cents out of every $100 that this economy generates. They deserve more. And in my view,
79 cents out of every dollar. I think he said every $100.
You heard what I said?
Yeah.
Did you hear me?
I heard you.
Good. So the point I'm making to you, and the thing about it is whether it's going to the pensioner, whether it's going to public assistant, the child care grants,
yep.
The school uniforms, even some of the help that they give some of these small businesses and daycares and that sort of stuff. It's not much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lucas, for joining me here on Nation Watch today. Viewers, I thank you very much for joining us. We are completely out of time today. We'll be back next week. with another edition of Nation Watch. I thank you very much for joining and staying the course on Nation Watch for today, 4th February 2024. I look forward to see you again next Sunday. Until we meet, God bless.